Welcome to the writers of the original cartoon series Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle panel here at PowerCon 2013. We've been very fortunate to get the chance to meet some of the writers of this cartoon. I know that this is one of the big inspirations for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to go as far as they have, and these guys are the ones that helped make it what we all know and love. So give a big round of applause for everyone on the panel right now. And I hope the others show up soon. Right now we have Larry and Roby and Francis. Sorry, I'm tired. I also am running a booth and running around. I've traveled from Michigan to do this event, and I've been on the road since June. So it's a great honor having you guys, and I was wondering if we could start off with hearing how each of you first heard of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Well, okay, Francis.
I'll start. It was 1988. There was a writer's strike, and being a good union guy, I was out on the picket line at 20th Century Fox.
1998? What's
88,
it like?
88.
All right.
And there was this tall guy with a beard. We struck up a conversation carrying signs together. It was, no, tall guy with a beard. His name was Jack Middleton. And he told me he was working on this show, was Mutant Turtle Ninjas something or other. You know, we couldn't quite get the name right, you know. At that point, I believe that we were already well into season 2, but that meant there was only, I think, about 10 episodes actually had been done. But he was contracted with Fred Wolf Films, who was the producer of the show, to deliver scripts. And I originally got hired because we were talking about computers, and, well, I don't know if Jack would mind me telling the story, but he's not here, so he's computer illiterate, pretty much. He was using a program to write scripts called WordStar. Anyone ever heard of WordStar? Okay. And when you do, you know how that each element in the script has a different margin. So for the character names, you would hit the tab key 4 times to bounce it over, you know, and dialogue, you would hit the tab key 2 times or something like that. Well, I showed him how to do macros, you know, so you could do Control-C and get the character name capitalized already, hit the enter key for the dialogue thing, and so on and so forth, you know, and that's sped up our work process. Well, it wasn't very long before I was story editor, and that was so much fun. I wrote my first script called, well, I'll save that story for later, but anyway, so that's how I got started with Jack. Our relationship lasted about 5 or 6 years, working on not just Turtles, but Camp Candy, New Adventures of He-Man, Police Academy, and James Bond Jr., and a number of other shows. And basically we were a script factory, so we would crank, you may know that television is kind of like Audrey 2 and Little Shop of Horrors, feed me, you know, every week 2 scripts. We got actors waiting to say your lines, they got artists waiting to draw the pictures, cannot stop the process. So we were a very busy shop for a number of years, and it was the best education in writing I think I ever had.
Well, and I'm Roby Gordon, and in my case, Jack was having a problem with his WordStar spell checker. So that's how I got on the show. No, that's not how it happened. Well, I had a similar experience. I don't think Ninja Turtles was on the air yet, and it certainly wasn't the 2nd season. And I knew Jack because I was involved with live television before animation, so-called live. I wrote, television shows, not cartoon shows. And Jack was sort of from my era, and for whatever reason, he came to me, or I met him somewhere, and he said he was writing this, Ninja Mutant Turtles show, and I thought he was joking. I really did. I just couldn't imagine. Now, I think the show came from the comic books.
Yes, he did.
Actually, but I didn't know anything about it. And in general, when I was writing animation, I started out writing Fat Albert, and then that led to He-Man, and that brought me very much in demand as a writer in those days. And just like Francis said, we were grinding this stuff out. And so I really didn't need to look for work, but I was fascinated by, especially as the show, I guess it got on the air at some point, and I know it did, but I really wanted to write for that show. And he was a tough guy to get a story through. Yeah. I mean, and
a little aside on that, he would do editing on your scripts with red ink.
Yes.
And many writers said it was blood, you know, and their blood.
He was brutal.
I got one back that was more red than white.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he was always on printed paper, as I recall. Or however he did it, it was like God, you know. Usually when we were writing in those days, people like Francis and they were loved to get our scripts. So there was very little rewriting. There was no time to rewrite. They hired people that could deliver, and we could. And pretty much whatever we wrote got on the air. You know, they recorded it. The actors did not complain. They came in and said their lines and left. It wasn't like when I was writing sitcoms and other shows where they're constantly being recorded. But in the case of Jack, he had his opinion about the show. It was really his baby, I always felt. So I had trouble getting storylines past him, but finally I figured I did do one that I just knew he would have to take, and that was the one about the collector who was collecting He-Man, Fat Albert, what this panel was that? Turtles memorabilia, and the last part of his collection would be the Turtles. Now, there's no way he could turn that down, and he didn't. So I wrote that, and there that got produced, and I wrote one more, and that was the attack of the 40-foot Irma?
50-foot Irma.
In animation, you know, height doesn't matter. So I wrote that too, and Francis says that's one of his favorites. You know, my background was comedy. I wrote television. Oh, that's enough of that. And then I have something on eBay I want you to look at.
I don't remember exactly how I met Jack. I think my writing partner knew Jack from one of the versions of Dennis the Menace, and so I called him up and pitched him some stories. As Roby said, Jack was very demanding about the stories, and if you had an ego, you just might as well not bother. But I have to say, I learned a lot writing for Jack Mendelson. I wrote the Turtles. Let's see, we did Camp Candy, New Adventures of He-Man. Probably a couple of others, and it was a real learning experience. I had started out writing He-Man at Filmation, and then I'd been on staff there for a year or two doing She-Ra and Ghostbusters and Brave Star and I forget what else. And so I was kind of that Filmation mindset, I guess. You
grind it out,
and then you don't worry about making it too sharp or bad. You know, too difficult for the kids to follow, or too difficult for Arthur to follow, actually. And so it was great making the transition over to Turtles and Thundercats. I think I did Thundercats about the same time.
He was a total pro. I mean, he took it very seriously. In my case, Turtles I took seriously, but I was pretty much in it for. I was a writer, a staff writer, and I just did whatever they wanted me to do. But with Jack, he was very, different there.
A little different, yeah. You were just, yeah.
Well, they had that big show, and they wanted to make sure it was something everyone was into.
Yeah.
You guys did a great job on each of the episodes, and I know that with like Turtles Everywhere is one of those episodes that just pop right out of my head.
Oh yeah.
In fact, my desktop at home, I call it Turtles Everywhere. So, with the episodes, is there anywhere you guys got the synopsis, had a full idea of what you wanted to do with it, and then it got rejected to where you had to do a full rewrite, or did it always go through to where it was just some corrections here or there?
I don't recall ever running into that with, I mean, Jack and Francis were the buffers for us, for the freelancers, really, and the studio and the network and whoever. So we got notes, and I don't recall anything ever, times when we had to rethink things, but by the time we got to scripting, we were pretty well approved. Unlike, as Roby says, unlike live action, writing that, it's everybody has an opinion.
As a rule, if you got the show, get the show, you pitched a premise, which is typically written a page and a half, a couple pages, beginning, middle, and end. And if that got by Jack, it most likely got by Fred Wolf, and who else is missing? Oh, Bill was missing. And unless you really screwed up the outline, you were on your way. But the biggest problem we had was Turtles was unlike anything else on the air, and a lot of people didn't get the show. They thought it was a cartoon show, and it was actually a comedy. And so that was the problem. But usually, as Larry mentioned the word gatekeepers, and that was kind of what our job was. This guy gets the show, or we can help him out to get the show. A girl too. There was a lot of women writers.
In my case, again, I wrote 2. I was busy writing other shows, but I really wanted to write the Turtles. Unlike people coming to me and I can say, I'm too busy, I'm not interested, but I want to. So I only really had time to do 2, or maybe Jack didn't want any more from me, I don't know. But again, it was a little different with Turtles. Again, whatever I would write for, He-Man, there was, minor notes, or any of these other shows. But Turtles was tough to get in, but once you got the story in and approved, I don't remember major rewrites. I think Jack did some, on my scripts, and but I recognized them when they were produced, and again, I've written I won an Emmy for writing some live shows and things like that, but nobody remembers those shows when I go to places. They find out I wrote Turtles, or Fat Albert, or He-Man, or all my other stuff. And animation, that's what people remember. So it's kind of interesting. That's what I'll be remembered for.
Yeah. Well, it could be worse.
Yes, it could be. It could be.
The Turtles. The thing that I liked about it was just sort of an inspired madness, and you could, you could get Jack to, if you had a good story, and there was a place in there for the humor, and Jack was very supportive, Francis too, but I don't think there's any show that I've ever done that had that kind of humor, and it was like for the time, we really were pretty edgy. It was a lot of fun.
Well, and again, a lot of humor on Saturday morning in those days was very, kind of bland. Jack came from a very solid comedy writing background. I know I mentioned I did so-called live television. His credits in live television were,
How many people know that he was one of the writers on Yellow Submarine? So.
On what?
Yellow Submarine.
What?
What? Yellow Submarine.
Oh, Yellow Submarine. Oh yeah, I didn't know that. So I mean, so that's why the script was very important to be funny. In the old days of animation, the storyboard artists really ran the show, as I understand, in the Disney days. And then when we started writing, when He-Man and these other shows came on, the script writers really ran the show. Now the storyboard artists were wonderful; they enhanced it, but it was much more a script-driven world in those days. In the case when Jack got a hold of that show, he knew what he wanted to do with comedy, and that's why the show was so solid comedy, unlike a lot of the other so-called comedy shows in those days, cartoon shows in those days.
Some of the most fun things to write were I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase breaking the fourth wall, where instead of just pretending that there's a story going on, they tell the audience about the story that's going on, Leonardo will say, we got to rescue April, stop Shredder, and unplug the Vasotronic regulator, and Raphael said, gee, it's only a half-hour show, or I smell To Be Continued coming on, something like that, where you could really address the audience. And I think one of the results of that, I mean, that was a whole level of adult humor. I suspect that the kids, I don't know if it went over their heads or it was a minor thing, but for the grown-ups who were forced to sit down with their kids and watch a stupid cartoon show, when I go to panels and stuff like that, and I get parents coming up to me and say, I had to watch that stupid show, but it was one of the most fun things I'd ever done, you know. So it was kind of, we had a level of humor that was for the parents who were sitting with their kids watching the show.
Pretty much everything else I would write to a certain extent. I mean, I wrote on some good shows, animation, but it was pretty much a formula in those days. You know, you didn't want to go too far. You didn't want to get the network upset. You didn't want to get the sponsors or the anti-violence people upset, and you just sort of wrote below the radar. And you didn't do it intentionally, but it just, that's how you kept working, you know. Although when I was writing He-Man, I put humor into that, and I got a lot of flack for that in my episode of The Greatest Show on Eternia, which people had said was the worst He-Man episode ever, and they labeled me the worst He-Man writer ever. I think it was also the worst Mario Brothers writer too, as I recall. You know, it's funny. Imagine you were working at Save-On Drugstore 30 years ago, and all of a sudden there's 30 years, and then there's a Save-On Drugstore clerk convention, you know, and talking about how you put the items on the shelf. I mean, in my case, I was writing, and it was not very glamorous at all. I mean, the end result was, but it was, we were just paid to write, where there was no union for the writers, and unlike our other work that we did, we were just writing stuff, and now here, is it 30 years later? You people know more about those shows than I do, quite frankly. I just found out today I wrote the, was it the 50-foot Irma?
50-foot Irma.
I thought I only wrote the one about the collection. I knew there was another one, I thought. I didn't write the third one, are you sure? I don't think I did.
Didn't show up.
Now, if you want to ask about Hollywood Squares questions, I can answer those. I also wrote for Ronan Martin's Laughing, which was my first series, and most of you people have no idea what I'm talking about. But you certainly know He-Man and Fat Albert and all those cartoons.
Now, with doing the different cartoons, every cartoon has a lot of characters that are similar to each other, but definitely very different in their own ways. Was it difficult to go from one cartoon to a different cartoon, writing a plot that was similar to the other cartoon that you already wrote?
Well, I have a story. I was hired to write, I was staff writer on Fat Albert for Filmation, and I wrote 13 of those, and then Arthur comes to me, he was the guy in charge of the writer. I said, well, that's the end of Fat Albert. Next week we started writing He-Man. I said, well, thank you very much, goodbye. Because I knew nothing about He-Man. I still don't know anything about He-Man. And I said, I just don't know that kind of a show. We want you to write funny episodes. But I don't know who they are. So what I did, I would take, Fat Albert was He-Man in a better built. And Mushmouth was Man-at-Arms, and that's in a way how because I had to start the next week. They gave me a stack of Bibles and scripts, and that's what I did. I just used the general style of the character to get me through He-Man until I finally left He-Man and started writing Berenstain Bears.
Yeah, I also with television, as a TV writer, you have to be a chameleon. When you move from show to show, if you really have to write that show. And if you don't learn that very early on, you're not going to have a career. So when you have to think about the characters, you have to and really internalize them. But yeah, you've got to be able to do it. You've got to be able to understand what the showrunner wants and write that.
Especially what Jack would want.
Especially what Jack would want. Unfortunately, Jack always wanted the good stuff. So.
No, I was just, Roby reminded me of, I think every writer, if he hadn't gone through this at least once, getting the credit for having written the worst show of the season, they haven't been doing their job. And Dean Stephan, who's here this weekend on a couple of panels, I believe he's on the He-Man, the Mike Young He-Man panel, claims that I got him fired from Nickelodeon for an episode of Cat Dog. So I think,
It was brutal.
Yeah, I guess it goes in the negative credit column, but, nevertheless, it's a credit, and you should take advantage of it.
Some of us complained that I wrote a show called The Transformers, the one, the CGI version. Mask Force? What was the CGI version of it? Anyway, they claimed that I stole dialogue from earlier scripts. They didn't know that I wrote my scripts before them, and the order was switched around.
Michelle, your question was about going from one show to another?
Yes.
Well, I think you carry your stories from one show to another. I go looking at a show I wrote called Shredder's Mother, and then I find Sonic the Hedgehog that I wrote. It's Robotnik's mother, and then somehow I have a theme in my head. I didn't hate my mother. I really didn't.
You'll find a volcano in most of my scripts.
And so you steal from yourself. That's really what it is. And you find a story that works for you in one show, give it a try in another one.
I wrote a Puffin Stuff live action show called where there was an energy thing in it, middle of the earth, and they were circling around this, and I used that for He-Man. That was the energy beast, and so I took that story. It was one of my first ones.
I've taken that one from you a couple of times. It's nice to know where it originally came from.
Dean Stefan, who I got fired from Cat Dog, just walked in the room.
It really was, looking back for a writer, He-Man really started a ton of writing going on. I would say that was one of the big breakthroughs. Everybody was trying to grind out these 26 episodes. We wrote an awful lot, and for writers who, and generally speaking, if you're a sitcom writer, if you're not on staff, you write maybe a few a year or whatever. You were really writing down a lot of stuff and things. One of the writers I work with says, "I want you to now write Rambo cartoon." I said, "Please, I have no idea what that is, And he had to show me what gun to use in every script. I still would put the wrong gun in, but I wrote all those kinds of things I never would have written in my comedy writing career. My background is, generally speaking, comedy, and those.
Yeah, that was really great advantage. I don't think they do that at all anymore. There's 65 episode orders, and it usually on a lot of shows, the first half dozen episodes, you're still trying to find the show.
Yes.
And so you have a lot of time to think about it, to work on the show, and you get sick and tired of it. But it's like it's relentless. There is down at the end of the line. There's a day where they want that show. It's supposed to be there, and you've got to get it started.
And if you're not a story editor, you don't always realize that. But especially in those days, they had an assembly line going on. You had to get those scripts. They were ink and painted in those days, and they had to get those to either it was Korea, North Carolina. Where were they sending this?
Taiwan and Korea.
Korea, and I think Mar Vista, California, and they had to have it in time. I remember I was Deke, and they had like 30-baud modems in those days, and they were just the story editors said, "You got to get this last scene," and I want to make it funny. No, you get it in, And then finally we pushed it through the modem at 300 bauds per.
Yeah, 300.
And they got it in time to get it out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, another show would come in and take the place of that at these houses in what was it? Taiwan. And we would they missed their air date,
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Oh, yeah.
Yes. I have a question about I'm trying to understand the writing process. In other words, do you basically, you independently come up with the entire idea for the show, or do you receive ideas? In other words, like, say for instance about the Ninja Turtles, does someone come to your office and say, "Look, I want you to write a story about these Ninja Turtles. They're pizza eating, they're pizza eating Renaissance artists. Come up with a story about it."
A new writer generally generated his own ideas, but if he worked for that show, we might hand him an idea for another one.
Yeah. It happened a lot at He-Man, for example. Arthur would say, "Write the story." I say, "Huh? Yeah, write it." Okay.
Yeah.
What was your guys' definition of like a perfect original Turtles episode? Like, what was like the ideal that you would be like I want to make the episode like this? Or was it different for each episode? Or just generally speaking, what was like the ideal you would try to strive for? Like the elements that would make a really good episode for you.
I think the first thing, we wanted to make it something that Jack liked, so that we got another script. But yeah, I don't, you know, you think about it. You think about when I do anyway. When I'm writing, I think about the audience, and I think about the kids. My daughter was about 5, I think 4 or 5 when I was doing this, so she was a Turtles fan. So I thought very much about writing for those kids. I've always, you know, television, as a television writer, working in television, it's kind of awesome, and when you think about it, because it means that millions of people are inviting you to come into their living room for half an hour, for an hour, and it's like, you know, you don't want to make an ass out of yourself. You don't want to bore them. You know, his job is to entertain them, to make them laugh, whatever. And so yeah, that's always in my mind.
That's the key. Don't be boring. So I think one of the things that happens when you're writing a script is you'll fall in love with a line of dialogue or a scene or a particular action bit. You know, if it's dialogue. And then if you go to the recording sessions where the voice actors are doing the voice, you say, oh, this line is so great. And then, boom, falls flat, lead balloon, you know. And it's kind of humbling, you know. So that's one of the things that if the actors in the room are really having fun with your script, you know it's going to work. You know?
I didn't go to many recording sessions because I was so busy writing, but I know I was at a Garfield recording session. Those were wonderful. I didn't know those, but those were just wonderful. I mean, what was his name? Who played Garfield in those days? Lorenzo Music. He would sit in a couch like he was Garfield, and you would think he was Garfield. In my case, my big issue was getting the script written and delivered. Now, when I was in school, I would do my homework the day it was, you know, when I got into class, I would do the paper. Well, that's how I wrote I hate to say it, all of my scripts for the most part. I started the script the day it was due, or the night before. And when I became story editor, I realized the problems I was causing, but they knew it. They knew that Roby will never get a script in time. And so that's how I wrote best.
The late Roby Gorman.
Yes. I wrote best and only good under pressure. I mean, when they were over my shoulders saying, please get this last thing finished, I wrote my best stuff, and that was how, and I wrote the funniest, the most wonderful things when I was writing that way, and that's usually how I did it. Was the day it was due. I said, I need 3 more days, and of course they knew it would be 7 more days, and you know, and they just always had another script ready to take my place, so they wouldn't lose their place in the, who's that coming in here? What is that thing on your head? Anyway, so that's so it was me just getting the script done, and it was always best when I started at the table. I don't know whether I tried that with Jack though. He may not have. I may have learned that.
Yeah, I don't
think he would have liked that.
I don't think he would have put up with it. Yeah.
Is there any more questions? Back there.
You alluded earlier to how you just kind of get the red ink or blood on your scripts and stuff. Which comment back proved to either be the most memorable or interesting or useful?
I was shocked, I'll tell you that, because I never got notes like that from anybody when I was writing animation. That's all I remember in general, the red.
It's hard to pick out one thing, but one of the things that was very helpful to me personally, and it wasn't even necessarily on my script, although I'm sure it was on half a dozen of my scripts, the little phrase OTN, O period, T period, N period, and that stands for on the nose, okay? And that was a no-no as far as Jack was concerned.
Oh, he didn't like that. And that's why it was every so much.
Yeah, okay.
That was good.
He wanted dialogue to not just move the story, in other words, lay pipe. He wanted it to be funny, he wanted it to be in character, and he wanted some subtext. And on the nose is, let's go. That's an on the nose phrase. Let's go, so everybody goes. I don't know if I can finagle this here doing stand-up, but it would be, if we don't leave soon, I'm going to hit you on the head. You know, at least a little humor, a little action, a little something there. That was pretty lame, but you get the idea. The opposite, whatever the opposite of OTN was, that was a good line for Jack.
Now, I do have one more question for you guys. Is there any characters you created for Ninja Turtles that you're specifically proud of?
Oh, what was it, Super Rocksteady and
Mighty Bebop?
Mighty Bebop. Yeah.
Well, certainly the 50-foot.
50-foot.
Is that available anywhere? Can I see it?
Yeah, it's on DVD.
Do you have it? Can I buy it from you?
No, I don't have that one.
I remember I liked doing that one because I never could write any of those kind of movies.
Super Bebop and Mighty Rocksteady was another one of my favorite episodes. I'm glad you guys are up here. And it kind of inspired, I wanted to do Bebop and Rocksteady get married, but I mean, you do see that cold romance thing kind of simmering under the thing here. But I think that would be ahead of our time.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say my favorite episode, well, I have a lot, but Shredderville is one of the favorite ones I wrote, which is kind of an homage or ripoff. It's a Wonderful Life. The first show I wrote, I got to put my kids in as characters. It was the fifth turtle. And my son Zach, who was about 8 at the time, got to be Zach on the show. And my daughter Caitlin, who was about 6, got to be Kate on the show. And they were popular enough, they got to be in several other episodes. Not necessarily ones I wrote.
That's nice.
Any other questions?
Yeah, earlier you were talking about how there was a lot of fourth wall breaking and whatnot, and Ninja Turtles, specifically stuff that later on adults would come by and see you and be like, hey, yeah, I had to sit through this stupid show. All of that. Now, based off of that, was there ever any point where you guys imagined that maybe one day the kids that you were writing for would be going back and seeing it from that same adult lens, like enjoying it all over again in a new way?
Not in a million years.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed very ephemeral that writing it, and it was very popular. I mean, the title from the comic books, but it's just, I mean, that's been what, 25, 30 years now. So,
and we had no idea it would.
It would have known we'd have written better.
Be around. I mean, when I look back at some of these great motion pictures like Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz, one of my favorites, Singing in the Rain. These people made these movies thinking it was going to be shown once. You just go into the theater, and that's the end of it. So when you see real quality in those old MGM films, for example, you have to have great respect for those people, knowing that they just wanted to do the best they could, and who would expect Wizard of Oz is coming out in 3Ds. Everybody there is pretty much dead, but their love and the quality of the work has survived. In our case, we didn't have quite that kind of a goal. We just wanted to,
make a buck.
Make a buck, really, and keep working. And we used all of the talents that we had. None of us expected to be here this year, and so many years later. And when I go into my local coffee shop, the people that work there who are like 20, they just, they want my autograph every time I go in there because of writing these shows.
One thing I will have to say is kind of sweet revenge, is back in the day when we were doing Toons, cartoon writers it was really a ghetto. I mean, everybody looked down their nose at cartoon writers. It was many years, I think probably until after shows like The Simpsons, that, and if you were, like I was a sort of live action guy, you just didn't talk about your cartoon background.
No.
You hit it. And now, look at it. So, that's very worth it.
A friend of mine, George Atkins, wrote some wonderful television shows, All in the Family, and shows, big shows. But the shows that he's remembered for are Rocky and Bullwinkle, and he would always say to me, "I can't believe it." And then later on, he started writing more animation. I got him work when he did animation work. I got him going in that. But he was always rather bemused at all of his, all that other stuff. People remember Rocky and Bullwinkle, which was at the beginning of his career, and the cartoons he wrote towards the end of his career as a writer. So we never expected any of that.
Cartoons do have a very strong impact on people.
Yeah, we didn't know that.
We honestly didn't realize, but we're glad that it did.
Okay, we have a question back there.
Unlike other TV shows at the time, which were created to support toy lines, the Ninja Turtles universe was created first, and then marketing, products came after. Could you talk a little bit about how that relationship could have affected storylines once the show became popular and new toys wanted to be promoted within the show?
Well, I recall in the latter seasons that I was working on the show, the toy company would introduce a new character. And I was talking with Michelle about this yesterday. There was Muckman and Joe Eyeball. I don't know if you remember that pair. It was the garbage collectors who turned into kind of living garbage. That was a toy first, and so write a show around this character was the kind of thing. But I have to say, it came kind of late in the game, and there was never really any pressure or push from the toy company, which after all was like based overseas, and probably not that experienced in the ways of promoting your products in a show. It never really affected us that much.
It's the same thing for He-Man too. Filmation had strong control over that show, and while we didn't know about the toys, we met at Mattel and they showed us the toys. Arthur never made us use it, although we did, but it was very much controlled by Filmation.
That's probably a good distinction that Robbie made, is that the creators of the show, if they control it, then the toy company takes a back seat. But if my experience on the New Adventures of He-Man, which was the second iteration of He-Man, about 1998 or something like that came out, it was very much Mattel controlled. We would have to write scenes with 10 characters in them, only 2 or 3 of which might have had a line. The other ones were just standing there. I'm sure some, statistician figured out that if Muckface gets 33 seconds of screen time with or without dialogue, we'll sell 1,000 more toys. So I think that was kind of that was one of the less pleasant aspects of working for that show.
And G.I. Joe is one that they told us what toys were going to be in the script, which period. So you really knew it. And there were a lot of them. Fortunately, they were all relatively easy to blend into a G.I. Joe story. But they were very, Hasbro was very specific.
They had to be careful because there was always a complaint that the shows were half-hour commercials. So it was always good to have something like, in the case of Filmation, you couldn't say that because we really weren't. And I didn't know that about G.I. Joe. So they tried. There were reasons why they didn't. They didn't want to get in trouble.
Filmation was certainly more concerned about that, about the shows not just being a commercial.
Yeah.
One interesting fact about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cartoon is that it was actually really backed up by the Playmates toys. Playmates was involved with Ninja Turtles before Fred Wolf film, but they still were able to make it a cartoon show worth watching, not just an advertisement.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. I had no idea.
Yes?
Yeah, sure.
A lot of the talk that you've had so far has been just you with the other head script writers, that kind of thing. Was there ever any point when you had any interaction with like the original comic books or their creators, and did they ever influence how you wrote the cartoon?
Comics were very different.
Yeah.
They're very dark.
Oh, absolutely.
Relatively speaking, anyway. And I think Eastman and Laird, I think they pretty much kept their distance. I mean, there may have been conversations up the food chain from us that I don't know about, but as far as our work day to day, never.
Yeah, I don't remember my brain slipped a cotton bit. But the guy at Marvel, was in all the movies.
Harry?
Pardon?
Harry?
No, from all the Marvel comics, and now he must be 100 years old, but he always makes a bit
Oh, Stan Lee.
Stan Lee.
You must be 100 years old.
No, I'm getting close. Getting closer every day. Did meet Stan Lee on Spider-Man cartoons, which were kind of cool. I mean,
Jack did
very briefly,
didn't he?
I think he did. Filmation did a version of Spider-Man.
Yeah, way back.
And then there was another version that they...
It was a very good version of Spider-Man. Who did that one?
I think...
Jack.
I'm not sure.
Was that Savannah? In the late mid-90s?
I know I was trying to write one.
The Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And
well,
John Semper?
Yeah, in the case of...
Can talk amongst yourselves.
Just briefly, in the case of He-Man, when I go to the convention, the He-Man rooms, you know, and I hear the what they call the 5 horsemen or something, I was really amazed that I had no contact, or that I certainly never had any contact for writing all those He-Mans with any of those people, and I sort of felt like a whore, quite frankly, because they cared about their development in great detail, and I just was there to, you know, to make fun of it all with my circus episode, you know, and I had no connection with those people. I was blank. I never knew those people.
Yeah, I didn't either.
You would have thought we would have, but we didn't. I didn't anyway.
Is there any more questions? Okay. Okay.
Of all the characters or Ninja Turtles, what were your favorites, like personal favorites to write for and why?
It's hard to say because it was a neat combination of characters. Michelangelo was always fun.
Yeah, I think I will.
And but you know, they were all fun to write. Never thought of, you know, one. Sometimes a story would use one character more than the others, but not a whole lot. Usually everything was kind of split up between the 4 of them.
I think Raphael was my favorite because he was very sarcastic.
Yeah.
And Shredder and Krang always reminded me of the Odd Couple. And so if you kind of think about, you know, those characters when you're writing them.
I can't remember any of them quite.
You must be.
You know, I only wrote 2, you know, and I just I liked them. You know, I knew they were all different. You know, and they all were comedically. Their characters were well defined because of Jack again. You know, so that's what made the show was one of the few shows I wanted to write for. Otherwise, people pretty much come to me and say, "Can you write this? Can you write that?" Or whatever my deal would be. But I really wanted to write for that show because I like the concept.
It was fun. It was completely off the wall, not connected to. I mean, I can't really. You look at it and say, you know, a lot of things you can say, oh, well, this is a variation of this or that.
Yeah. There was no. It wasn't a formula. It wasn't a formula. Although my shows were formula. It wasn't a formula as we would write for the, or as I would write in general. I mean, I never thought I was writing formula, but we had to write so much stuff, you know, those days.
So you tend to fall back on your favorite little tropes or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are inspiring writers out there who were very inspired by your guys' works on the cartoons throughout the years. Is there anything you would like to say as advice to those who want to get into writing?
Don't.
Well, I mean, now with the internet and all the wonderful tools you have, you don't need this huge assembly line to do what you want to do. If there's anybody here that wants to do it, there's no restrictions anymore. You can do some. I see some wonderful things on the internet with all kinds of tools, from Flash to everything else. So you don't need to go through. You can find your own niche of what you want to do, and you'll find your audience. It's quite wonderful. You could only be a Filmation. You could only be a Disney to do animation in those days. Now you can do whatever you want, whether it's in animation or comedy. If you go to robycomedies.com, you'll see what I'm doing now. And also now on eBay, I'm trying to sell. No. Every now and then I go on eBay, I do a search for Roby, and occasionally I'll find something there.
Oh, I haven't done that on eBay. Well, I think that the same 3 rules for writing apply to today's the new media as it did back when we were doing cartoons, and that is, you know, first of all, you have to write. Secondly, you have to write. And third, you have to write some more. There's no way around it. I mean, there are some people, I know, I met some people, and I hate them, that are it just comes out naturally. Yes. I mean, they just could sit down and did it. But for most of us, it's
Mark Evanier could write like
oh my God, yeah. And the
first draft, Garfield.
You have to put the time in, and put a lot of time. That was one of the great things about doing cartoons, because we had to crank a lot out, but we really learned how to write. Yeah, for me, that was very important later in my career.
I had decades of so-called live background behind me when I started this, but I learned more, and I had more writer's confidence, more confidence in my writing because of the stuff I had to write so much of. And I said, yeah, when you write for sitcoms, the actors come in and hate everything you do, and you have to rewrite it. In animation, you write it, and what you write, in most cases, come right out on the screen. So it's like, yeah, what I wrote is good, and it's okay. But my first drafts were dreadful. I would write anything and just put them down, and then I would go back and rewrite them. I would never show anybody my first drafts, and that's how I wrote. I just wrote without any censorship at all, and that's how. Then I would go back and rewrite it again, or I'd go back and rewrite some of yesterday's things. You know, as they were knocking on my door, begging for the script. I'm working on yesterday's the thing I said I'd get ready today. So anyway, so rewriting is how I did it.
Yeah, no, it's a process of rewriting. It's also a process of you know, you in television you just have to, like, you can't have an ego. You've got one job and one job only, and that's to make sure that the showrunner is getting what he wants and needs.
Yes.
And I don't know, my writing partner and I have laughed about it now I guess we laugh about it many times. We've gone in for script notes, and they love the script. That is a great script. They're just bouncing off the walls, and we walk out of there and we look at it and say, oh, that's about a 75% rewrite. So you say, okay, well, they're happy with it. Hopefully they'll be happy with the what we do next.
You know, now on the internet, you know, with all the bullying, it's very brutal. I mean, if you go to robycomedies.com and look at, fortunately I have comments turned off on YouTube. But you have to have a strong ego when you're writing in today's world, but you just go for if you write it, if that's what you're here for, learning, you just go for it and ignore these trolls that are on the internet that usually have anonymous names, I notice, who say the most dreadful things, and I don't let them get by my comments. So yeah, ego is interesting for an artist today. Everybody's a critic. But still go ahead and do it, because you can do wonderful things. If that's what you're here for, I don't know. Maybe you're just here to buy toys.
Buying toys is good.
Now, have you guys got to meet or work with any writers who inspired you to be writers?
Jack Mendelson.
Jack Mendelson, what's his name? Jose Borges, John Garth. A few, but the writers that inspired me when I was young and in college and going to write novels and whatever. And in terms of script writing, certainly I've worked with some very good people. I mean, the people that I've worked with that were inspiring and demanding. Gene Roddenberry was one, you know, probably, and a guy named Fred Wolf, who probably no one knows him. He's the only person who's ever been the president of all three networks. And we used to call Fred the human speakerphone, because when he made a call in the writer's room, you could just hold the phone up and everybody heard every word he said. But he did a lot of stuff, ton of stuff.
In my case, my first show was Rowan Martin's Laugh-In, and the writers on that show were so diverse. I had writers who worked with writers who worked up in the Catskills, which was a place in New York where comedians like Carol Burnett, Woody Allen, you know, got started, and if you weren't funny there, you wouldn't survive the next day. So I worked with writers like that, and all kinds of performers, and so that was my big training, with people from all types of writing, other than individual writers, not really. I mean, I like, you know, Freddie the Big Books, you know. I mean, I was not really inspired by any particular writer's style. I certainly like certain styles of comedy, like the Monty Python and things like that. But no, other than the writers I worked with, you know, like Jack and Larry DiTilio, and people who are very good writers, who loved what they wrote. When Larry was writing He-Man, he loved what he was writing. You know, he was passionate. I wasn't, but I learned from him.
Yeah, I have to add Larry to that group too. In fact, Larry got me my first job in animation. Coming off the writer's strike, I'd written a couple of episodes of a show called Buck Rogers in live action. But after the strike was over, another strike, then I get all my jobs. I never realized that. from writer strikes, you know.
Yeah, no, it was a great way to network.
Okay, yeah. But anyway, so there was a panel at the Writers Guild, alternate forms of writing for all you starving writers out there. And Larry was on the panel, and I came up to him after the panel, and he said, hey, you know, we talked. He said, come on over to Filmation. They're doing this show called Shira. And that's how I started. So he was inspired. Jack was really about the craft of writing more than any other writer I've ever worked with, and I learned a lot. As a reader, I used to read science fiction avidly, so I would just say, you know, Heinlein is my favorite, and Theodore Sturgeon, and what's her name, the lady dragon thing? Yeah, McCaffrey, thank you. And inspirations like that came I guess the genre I spent the most time in has been science fiction or that kind of thing, and I think I was probably inspired by those kinds of writing.
I read a lot of Agatha Christie for some reason. I don't know why. I got hooked on her, which did me no good in animation, of course. But the other thing that was interesting about animation compared with live action, if you would write a script for a sitcom, if you wrote anything that the director was supposed to do, he would ream you out. I've had experiences where I said, she gets up and goes to the table. You know, the director would say, that's my job. Well, in animation, especially in our world of animation, not the Disney olden days animation, you wrote everything. You shot, you gave the camera shots and everything else. So later on when I did a little bit of directing, I learned all that from learning about, you know, camera angles and focusing on characterization, you know, dramatic use of camera angles. We did all that in writing animated script, which you would never do on a sitcom.
Yeah. Turtles wasn't as much as other shows. I mean, like shows like G.I. Joe. I think it was something that, you know, Jack insisted on it. That not, you know.
Getting involved in the camera shot.
Yeah, if you get involved, I always, my argument was like, okay, so you lay out this elaborate sequence, and if for some reason they can't do or won't do or whatever one part of it, then the whole thing falls like, you know, dominoes. So what's the point? It's the director has a job,
Yeah.
the storyboard guys have a job, and then our job is to get the story and the dialogue down. And that was sort of the basic rule of Jack's, which I thought was very good.
Which wasn't Filmation's. They wanted all that.
They wanted it all.
Oh, they had a wonderful storyboard department. They were
Yeah.
in some ways more talented than us. I mean, they were having a great time and did some wonderful things with our scripts. I mean, we were good too.
Yeah.
They were great.
We do have to start wrapping this up. We got 10 minutes left. If there's anything you guys want to say to the fans.
Well, thank you. Thank you very
We
much.
want to say to you, why are you here?
It's very flattering. I mean, I have this bridge in Brooklyn. No. It's really kind of humbling, and it's very, you know. I mean, we all are very grateful for the.
Did you come here for the Turtles, or did you came for He-Man and there were Turtles too?
Turtles.
It's
I'm the
overflow
only
from.
Thundercats person in here.
So you came here for the. Who came here mainly for the Turtles?
Oh my God! All right.
All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming. It really is.
Isn't that amazing?
It really is humbling, and I appreciate it. And, and come by my booth, 204 down in
He has
the
a
hall.
bunch of scripts.
I got a bunch of scripts.
He saved his scripts. You know, they would throw away these cells, and we never thought to keep any of them. I didn't anyway.
Oh my God, yeah. I could pay for my retirement if I just kept all the cells I got from me.
Well, I'm set for life. I don't have to worry about any money. If life ends next week.
As long as it doesn't go on too long.
Well, that's just quite amazing. That I see people from all different ages. I mean, are the cartoons airing anywhere?
Yeah.
Where?
They're on DVD.
DVD. What is that? Oh, yeah.
Canada has them on the air right now, too.
Yeah.
Have you seen my one about the 50 foot
Let's see, I think we watched it last week.
Really?
Yes.
That's great.
That's great.
That'd be cool. I mean, it's just
Somebody buy Robbie a DVD.
Are they for sale here?
I don't know. Is your booth?
Let me know. Let me know if it's for sale. I want to buy my.
No, Amazon.
Oh, Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything else the three of you will be in, panels or autograph sessions this weekend?
I did He-Man last year. They banned me from any future He-Man because of the comments I made. So I'm not doing He-Man. I'm only here today.
But no, you're scheduled, both of you guys are scheduled to do some autographing.
Oh, autographing, yes.
And I think that, I was told that people who have booths, like myself, will be autographing in the booth. So if you have any...
We go right to the autograph tables?
That's what I think, yeah. If you have any tchotchkes you want to bring by for me to sign, I'd be happy to.
You came here for the turtles.
I'm supposed to do a panel tomorrow on She-Ra, Princess of Power, which I wrote a number of those as well.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming.
Thundercats too.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
everyone else for coming. Have a great convention.